Over the years, I've spent more hours than I can count in this forest. There's something about it that keeps drawing me back. It might be the way the light shines through the trees, the radiating green of the plants on the forest floor, or the lush carpets of moss. Whatever it was, I wanted to bottle it, to bring a piece of it home and make my very own forest aquarium. But things didn't go quite to plan, not even close. But before any of that, I should take you back to the beginning. This was a tank I was given by someone who was about to throw it away. It had some tough stains, but it held water, so we were off to a good start. I collected these branches from the forest and had them dry by the fire for a few days. These would serve as our submerged trees. I liked the idea that the forest wouldn't just play an inspirational role in the tank, it would play a physical one too, with the wood being incorporated into the hardscape. I cut flat ends on the branches so that I could measure the height accurately and marked them for where the top would be cut. It was quite therapeutic actually, even though I had no clear plan for how I wanted the tank to end up. I just went with the flow, which ended up costing me dearly, especially since this was my first freshwater tank ever. Nevertheless, I got to cleaning, and with some soapy water and a bit of elbow grease, I had the tank looking pretty good. I scraped the bark off with a knife and boiled the branches to kill anything that might contaminate the water. My lava rocks were very dusty, so they needed a good wash. And interestingly, they were all different colours once they were clean. These combined with the wood would form the tank's hardscape. The moss was a central element to the forest, and I wanted that aspect replicated in my tank. Of course, I couldn't just buy moss, I had to grow it. I got this table thing that came with grow lights for propagation. I assembled that, and it was nicer than I had anticipated. To begin this process, I needed some moss. I thought this Christmas moss looked quite similar to the thick carpets that grew on the trunks of the trees in the real forest. And for variety, I added some Java moss. I picked up these propagation trays from Amazon and lay a thin mesh sheet in the bottom. Moss grows from both ends, so when it's cut into small pieces about 1 centimeter long, each piece will grow from both ends. Essentially, the smaller it's cut, the faster the tray will fill in. I took these clumps and spread them across the tray as evenly as I could. It was at this point that I realised I'd grossly overestimated the amount of moss I would need, but I was intrigued with how this would turn out, so I did the same with the Java moss. It was a bit messier and more grass-like, but it ended up working quite nicely in the end. I mixed the recommended amount of hydroponic fertilizer into a spray bottle and watered everything. The bottom of the trays and the mesh, make sure that the moss isn't sitting in water, that's how algae grows. Ensuring it was all evenly watered, I put the loose lids on and set the lights to an 8-hour timer. The closeness of the trees in the forest was an aspect I wanted to replicate in this tank. To do so, I thought that making bases for the trees and putting them in first would make the most sense. A bit of super glue and a plastic box would do the trick. Cyanoacrylate is aquarium safe, and if you spray a bit of water on it, it dries quicker. There were some stubborn stains on the water line that I just couldn't get rid of, but I was okay with the fact that this wasn't going to be perfect. I think it adds character. I added small mesh bags filled with stones to help create a slope from back to front, without using excessive amounts of substrate. I didn't have the perfect layout planned, but I had a general idea of what I wanted the end result to look like. I played around with different arrangements, realizing that some of the tree trunks had unique characteristics that could be used to draw the eye to certain areas of the tank. Lava rocks were used to solidify the base, as well as decorate. 2 months had passed since the mini moss farm had begun, and there was some significant green healthy growth. The moss had grown onto the mesh, but was far more attached than I had anticipated. Nevertheless, I removed small clumps and with a tiny amount of superglue made these little pads of moss on the tree trunks. In the forest, it grows in unusual ways, surrounding knots and branches. Although the Java moss was less like a carpet and more stringy, it still had a unique look to it that I really liked. It's not just the trees that the moss grows on, it's the rocks too. Aqua soil was my substrate of choice. This would give plenty of nutrients to the plants and the moss to help it grow and thrive. The brand I'd bought is very high quality, which means that along with the nutrients it releases a large quantity of ammonia. To cycle this, regular water changes are required for the first few weeks. Before that though, I used a sand flattener to smooth out a slope, very carefully evening out the aqua soil between the trees. I think it helps to give an added sense of depth to the tank. The resulting tank composition came together quite nicely, with a focal point of the largest tree in the front right. It unintentionally aligned with the rule of thirds pretty well, and had some symmetry in there too. Plants were the next thing on the agenda. My brother generously gave me some trimmings from his tank, and I picked up a few other random plants, without giving it too much thought. I'd seen someone fill their tank with a few inches of water to help with planting, but to be honest, a dry start would have actually been much easier. Nevertheless, things were going very good and I was excited for this tank to get going. I planted some of the faster growing plants at the back, such as Limnophila siciliflora and Vallisneria, hoping they'd fill out the back of the tank and emphasise that depth. I was a little bit more deliberate with the foreground, spacing things out and imagining how they would grow in time, but at this point I wasn't actually too exact. I wanted it to just look full and alive. Looking back, I definitely underestimated the planning that should go into a tank like this, but I was naive and hopeful for my first freshwater build. Little did I know, this was the best that this tank would ever look. Things were not off to a great start. I'd never used aqua soil before, but I knew this wasn't normal. My plants would just not stay in the substrate. The issue had gotten so bad that every time I checked on the tank, there were a load of plants stuck in the filter intake. This replanting went on for weeks, and I was worried about the plants not getting the chance to root properly. So I made the decision to try something new. I realised that the mesh bags of stone were too high, which was making it difficult for me to plant the roots deep enough. I stripped the tank of everything, back to its starting point. I was so traumatised by the floaters that I decided to add a sand cap to keep everything in place. It definitely wasn't in my original idea of how the tank would look. I'm not sure if I've ever seen a forest with sand in it. Nevertheless, compromises had to be made for the plants' sake. It was time for them to go back in, and I was a bit more intentional this time, creating a Monte Carlo foreground with a few other taller plants to the back. I naively thought that the anaerobic bacteria that the sand would create would help the nitrate cycle of the tank. So I added my CO2 and my checker, set my lights to 8 hours and left it to settle. The tank had other plans. After only a few days, the Black Plague had begun to spread across my beloved plants, and in a few weeks it was in total control. It was a beginner's nightmare, Blackbeard algae. I spent the next 3 weeks removing it every day by hand, but it was stubborn and relentless. It blocked all the light to the plants, which decimated the tank, turning everything into this brown translucent mush. I was at my wit's end because my water parameters were all in healthy ranges, my light was suitable for the tank size, and the filter was established with healthy bacteria, yet nothing was working. But I wasn't going to give up yet. I once again drained the tank for what felt like the 100th time in an attempt to save what was left of the plants. I thought the sand was too fine and it was choking the plants, blocking the nutrients from reaching them. I was left with a desolate wasteland, small few surviving plants and dwindling hope for the rest of my forest ecosystem. In the following months, life persisted. The moss on the trees had to be trimmed back, and with the addition of a few more plants, things were looking positive. Diatoms were a recurring issue, but with some manual intervention, they were kept at bay. I was eager to add some more life to this ecosystem, but was traumatized by all the issues it had had. But test after test were clear, so it was time for some colour. These striking red beauties are Bloody Mary shrimp, a type of Neocaridina. They create a lovely contrast with the green moss and plants, and seem delighted to pick away at the bits of algae and biofilm around the tank. Their tiny legs flicker constantly, exploring every surface almost obsessively. They mingled amongst each other and performed the vital duty of cleaning the tank. I really enjoy watching them with their beady eyes walking up and down the trees. They seemed very content, giving me hope that my system was about to begin thriving. And when the lights began to turn off, they became more still and rested, either picking away very slowly or floating on their favourite bit of moss. Although there was ample biofilm for the shrimp, I still ensured that they had a healthy mix of foods, such as pellets and vegetables, so they had access to all the required nutrients. This tree was the perfect place to hold this blanched cucumber for them. They picked away eagerly and really began to make this tank feel like a living ecosystem for the first time. However, as you might have spotted, something was looming over the tank once again. The Blackbeard algae was back. This cut me deep. I thought I had balanced the system perfectly before adding the shrimp, and had given it more than enough time to reset. I was determined not to let it get a hold of the plants for a second time, but dosing the tank with carbon was not an option, as it would most certainly harm the shrimp. But as it turned out, that was the least of my worries. My disappointment was immeasurable. I'd grown to really like the shrimp, and my hopes for this ecosystem were extinguished. As unfortunate as it was, I had only one option. The tank had to be taken apart, and the shrimp needed a new home. Luckily, I have a brother that's far better at fish keeping than me, and he has an established tank. He was the reason my previous video went to plan. And although this is not an ideal outcome, I've learned a huge amount over the past few months. So much so that I'm confident that someday soon I will revisit the forest ecosystem and do it properly. I'm yet to meet someone in this hobby that was successful from the very beginning, but I wanted to make this video regardless to show that failing is a part of life, especially with aquarium ecosystems being such intricate balancing acts. So if you're out there trying something new and falling flat, good. That's the only way to learn.